enjoyed, are simply no longer available in a big city, Los Angeles, and the city attorney's office can help change that. In addition to being I'm a father, I'm a husband, nonprofit that mentors and serves formerly homeless families. I'm a teacher here at LA City College. And I think all these perspectives are what I bring as my underlying values to this office.
And then Faisal.
Good evening. Thank you all for taking the time to come out and listen to us speak and give our vision for the office. My name is Faisal Gill. I immigrated here in the United States when I was 8 years old. I'm a father driver, and my mother worked in various retail stores. So those are the values that I'm going to be bringing. That's the perspective that I'm coming from. I'm a criminal defense attorney and a civil rights attorney. And most of my work in civil rights work has been defending people who've been subject to wrongful arrest, police brutality, and discrimination. Criminal defense, I defend people every day of my life for the last 20 years who have been charged with minor offenses, who've been charged with big offenses, and where prosecutors just want to lock them up and that's it. There's a different way we can do this, and I want to bring that different way to the LA City Attorney's Office, which deals with all the misdemeanors, and I will.
Well, Faisal, you led perfectly into my next question. Misdemeanors are generally understood as more minor, low-level, or petty offenses compared to felonies and can range from a variety of activities, from failure to pay a fine, failure to show up for your jury summons, so watch out for that, to low-level drug possession, and even some street vending activities. From 2010 to 2019, LAPD's top 3 categories of misdemeanor arrest were other, public intoxication, and DUI. Misdemeanor prosecution is currently an enormous part of what the LA City Attorney's Office devotes its time to, spending 1/3 of its $137 million budget in 2021 on misdemeanor prosecution. But the LA City Attorney is not obligated to prosecute every single misdemeanor charge that's brought to the office. In fact, the LA City Attorney can decide to decline to prosecute or to prioritize certain charges for diversion. In fact, studies have shown that criminal prosecution of the majority of misdemeanors has minimal or even negative effect on public safety, while prioritizing restorative justice and diversion has a positive effect on the community. We were hoping to have someone impacted by the misdemeanor system come speak today, so I'll be asking this question. Are there certain categories of misdemeanors that the City Attorney's Office is currently prosecuting that you would decline to prosecute or prioritize for diversion? We're going to start with Kevin on this one.
Thank you, Marissa. I actually think that with the possible exception of DUI, every misdemeanor potentially, well, with other than domestic violence, hate crimes, DUI, I think that every misdemeanor really should be diversion. One of the things on my website is kind of an explanation of the based on experience that I had at City Hall. And we did at City Hall with all the involved entertainment fund. It's for young people at City Hall at the time and had no access to the industry. It was an internship program, not a diversion program. What we saw from that is that the people who came through there really were interested in getting to the job, not necessarily at a city or an agency, but the union part. And so I call it not a diversion program to jobs pipeline. I'm endorsed by laborers and IATSE, both labor unions already about this diversion partnership for jobs.
Thank you. I spent 16 years as a deputy city attorney in the office since 2018. The prosecutor currently serving underneath Mike Fiore. I have also worked my way as master calendar deputy and filing deputy. Specifically, I'd like to talk about 12500, which is driving without a license, the vehicle code. This is a big issue for myself in the Latino community because there's times that the government issues. I'd also talk about 14601 of the vehicle, which is driving on a suspended license once you've been given notice. I would prioritize sexual battery and domestic violence because I'm a victim of both. I am now thriving and in a happy marriage with my husband, but that was not always the case. And I understand what victims go through as they try to recover from some of the issues, including trauma. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie, and also thank you for sharing your experiences. We'll go to Faisal next.
So, yes, on day one, I will put out a memo that basically states all the low-level misdemeanors that I will decline to prosecute, very similar to the Rachel Rollins memo that she put out. You know, trespassing on public property, loitering, sex work, just things you mentioned. These are not crimes that should be prosecuted. These are not crimes that people should have to go out, get a lawyer for, and then pay for diversion programs. So, no, there's a lot of crimes that I am not going to prosecute because they don't affect public safety. The ones that I do prosecute, my goal every single time will be to place them into a diversion program. But I want to be very clear. I don't want to misuse diversion programs. Now, I practice every day in courts. A lot of the times prosecutors will misuse diversion programs for charges that should be dismissed, that should have never brought here. Diversion programs you have to pay for, it still places a lot of burden, and mostly places a burden on folks who can't afford it. So I will not misuse the diversion programs, and it'll only be used for things such as domestic violence and all.
Thank you, Faisal. Now, Marina.
I'll start off by saying that I think we can't overstate the importance that having a criminal record does to people. I talk a little bit about this on my website, but one of the big reasons that I became a prosecutor was because of my own brother's time in the criminal justice system. He was charged as a 16-year-old with 2 strikes and ended up doing 5 years in state prison. And that conviction has followed him everywhere, even now to law school, where I have to sign for his leases still to this day. So I don't want to, I want to make sure we put enough focus on that. And for a lot of people, that pathway starts oftentimes with a misdemeanor that would have been much better diverted or much better not filed in the first place. And there are certainly categories that I would deprioritize for prosecution. So for example, I started off doing a lot of human trafficking and sex offense work. So sex workers, I think that should be something that we strongly consider not prosecuting or at least deprioritizing prosecution. Street vendors, another one. Broad category of first-time useful offenders is another.
Thank you, Marina. We'll go to Heidi next.
I may be the lone wolf on this one. I don't think prosecutorial discretion is something that is exercised to invalidate a law. That to me is policymaking. Prosecutorial discretion is exercised on a case-by-case basis for the circumstances and in individual situation. So first-time offenders, nonviolent petty offenses, misdemeanors that on the books have a racially disparate impact on prosecution. That's what should not be enforced. So if were me, I would do retroactive racial impact rules on the penal section of our municipal code, the penal code of the state of California, where the city attorney represents California in the city of Los Angeles. I do not believe it appropriate for the city attorney to substitute her judgment for the legislatures. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll finish off with A.
Yes, I agree with you. Most of the candidates that exercise diversion for first-time offenders and low-level criminal justice system and a criminal record does have cascading effects on someone's lives. Their ability to pay their rent, keep their patient status. So we need to be very careful in how we use that criminal record and the prosecutorial actions that we take. I think it's the key part of the city attorney's office where someone's arrested for a misdemeanor. They won't be prosecuted as long as we commit alcohol anonymous or some kind of treatment. And if they fulfill commitment, then they're no criminal. I think there is a benefit for having that of prosecution. So many social workers and doctors that that's a helpful tool to get people the help they need.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for speaking so well. I'm really impressed. I'm sure everyone will appreciate on this panel that tough legal questions really never have a straightforward answer. So the legal advice that people give See, and heavily giving the advice. City Council has heavily on LA City Attorney for advice, particularly as it's considering new ordinances. Let's talk about two recent housing examples. In 2021, the LA City Council passed a new version of Los Angeles Municipal Code 4118, which allows City Council members to designate public spaces where it will be an infraction to sit, sleep, buy, or store personal property in a way that obstructs passage. Just 2 years before, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Martin v. Boise had struck down a very similar municipal ordinance as violating the Eighth Amendment rights of individuals experiencing homelessness by criminalizing their position and their circumstances. Despite the Ninth Circuit case, the LA City Attorney advised City Council that 4118 was constitutional. In our second example, when the LA City Council was considering whether to pass blanket eviction moratoriums in April 2020, which was being passed by cities in California and all over the country, they ultimately did not pass this blanket eviction moratorium, in part because the LA City Attorney advised that it would interfere with private contractual rights. If you had been city attorney, what advice would you have given the council in both of these instances? Let's start with Heidi on this one.
You don't like to ask easy questions, do you? At the end of the day, we are bound by the consent orders that our own city attorney entered into. I don't understand how in that consent order, where the city of LA agreed not to prosecute sit, slip, sleep, lie, without providing housing, we can possibly do that. So the first thing I would tell you is that before we enforce a homelessness ordinance, we need to be able to provide housing to the folks who need it. And I start with, we can't prosecute our way out of homelessness. We can't litigate our way out of homelessness. That takes 5 years. We can't settle. We've got to build housing. And at the current price of $2,000 to $3,000 per square foot, we can't build our way out of homelessness. So the first thing I would do is really focus on the positive side of providing housing. I don't want to ignore your eviction moratorium. The issue with I think with the emergency powers, you'd need to declare a state of emergency, but it's clear that for something like the pandemic, you can issue the eviction moratorium, in my humble opinion.
It is a lot to get through in a minute, I admit. We'll go to Faisal next.
So I've been very clear on this issue. As far as 4118 is concerned, I think it's absolutely unconstitutional. The Ninth Circuit has ruled on it before. So my advice would have been that the current city council could not have passed 4118 as it is, or at all. As far as the blanket eviction moratorium goes, I again have to disagree with the city attorney, and I think absolutely the city council could have passed the blanket eviction moratorium, and that would have been my advice. Given the pandemic, given what's going on, city has emergency powers, and you can absolutely pass the blanket eviction moratorium. But let me go back to 4118 since I have a little bit more time. 4118 is not only unconstitutional, but it's also immoral. I mean, it's how can you arrest someone or take their things away just because they're houseless? I mean, that to me is the prevailing thing. But beyond that, Jones case after case in the Ninth Circuit, one second. There's the person that needs possession. Person in the public.
602K and many sections. And I will say this, we cannot criminalize someone for being unsheltered. We should not criminalize people for being poor. And we should not criminalize people like the poor man I prosecuted who had a mental illness, who could not intellectually, given his disability, understand that he was no longer put in place to protect that location. We need to get the mentally ill out of our criminal justice system and off our streets.
Thank you. Next question, I'm going to give an intro and then turn it over to our community speaker. The City Attorney's Office is empowered under California State Law Business and Professions Code 17200 to represent the people of California in affirmative litigation against any businesses that are engaging in conduct that is unlawful, unfair, or deceptive. The City Attorney's Office has currently used this power in lawsuits against Wells Fargo for deceptively opening up bank accounts without customers' permission, against port trucking companies for misclassifying drivers as independent contractors and deducting hundreds of thousands from their wages, and against home health care employers and car washes that have been committing wage theft against predominantly immigrant workers. One of those workers is here today, Josephine Biclar, who was a victim of wage theft. She is a caregiver, and she worked with the office in 2017 and 18 to vindicate her own rights. She has a question for the candidates about affirmative litigation. Joe, would you be able to come up here and use this mic? And thank you so much for coming today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Josephine Biclar, and I have been a caregiver for more than 10 years here in the United States. I love my job taking care of elderly here in America. I learned a lot, and it allows me to provide the basic needs of my family, and such as their housing, their food, and their education. However, I became a victim of wage theft. I learned the hard way that wage theft was happening to me when the agency I worked for did not pay me the minimum wage and the overtime pay. The agency had paid me less than half of what I was owed. I decided to recover my stolen wages when the daughter of my patient told me that they are paying us $30 per hour. And that I was involved in the case against the agency. In 2017, together with more than 20 caregivers, we filed against the employer for violation of minimum wage, overtime pay, and others for domestic workers. The case was handled by the LA City Attorney's Office. The agency settled, and more than 250,000 back wages were distributed to more than 200 caregivers. The name of the agency is I forgot. It's the Nurses Home Care Nurses Home Corporation. It's located in San Fernando Valley. And but in spite of this victory, wage theft is still rampant in LA. Every day, many caregivers and hardworking people are still not being paid correctly, and their wages are stolen by employers. How will you stop this? What are your proposals for effective enforcement strategies to address these issues?
Thank you so much, Joe. We'll start with Faisal on this one.
So thank you very much for sharing your story, and thank you very much for fighting back for your rights. That shows kind of a good person you are. Look, the number one thing that the city attorney's office needs to do to fight against wage theft is beef up the affirmative litigation department. The affirmative litigation office right now is woefully understaffed, and they don't have the resources to go after everybody. The Wells Fargo settlement that you just mentioned, That settlement can only be used in the affirmative litigation office. That's what the first thing that I will do is I will beef up the affirmative litigation office so we can go after corporations who are depriving our workers of their fair wages, and then also go against corporations that are doing other things that are unlawful or deceptive. But without having the adequate resources, the city attorney's office, as it's done since 2017, has not gone after all the people that they should go after. And so my thing is to really beef up the affirmative litigation department and then make this a priority. This has to be a priority.
Thank you, Faisal. We'll go to Teddy next.
Sure. I also want to thank our guest speaker. That's hard to participate in the litigation and to know about your rights. It underscores, I think, the key challenge in our city. Over $25 million is stolen from workers every week in our city. Home care workers, garment workers, construction workers, hotel workers. In too many industries, Los Angeles leads the nation in wage theft. It has to be a priority. And I think it starts with first advertising that the laws, what the laws are, so people in workplaces know that they have rights and who to call. We have better hotlines and information available to know what to do when you're being exploited in that manner. We need more inspectors, more litigators, but we have over 500 lawyers in the office. We have the resources we need. We just need to make it a priority, and I would do so in office.
Thank you, Teddy. We'll go to Cherie next.
My mom put my dad through medical school by babysitting 12 children other than her own. She also learned Misdemeanor and then LV, and I am very proud of her work and her dedication to support my brothers and I, my dad, and our family. I was a consumer fraud prosecutor for 8 years, and the Affirmative Litigation Unit was born out of consumer fraud. It's the civil arm. My specialty was taking both civil and or criminal action. I litigated one case against Gloria Cecido, who stole the identity of a legitimate business and defrauded migrants. I brought the undocumented to court, protected them so they could vindicate their rights. That's my bailiwick, and I want to expand that unit because wage theft, fraud, identity theft stems from that unit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cherie. We'll go to Heidi next.
Thank you. I want to give a shout out to the Affirmative Litigation Unit in the City Attorney's Office, not just on wage theft, but they also brought the action against TurboTax for deceptive practices, and they brought the action on PP&E when we were all starving for PP&E, the protective masks at the beginning of the pandemic, and healthcare workers couldn't get them. And the City Attorney's Office sued to get the monopoly broken. Specifically on wage theft, yes, it is a good source for affirmative litigation against employers. But again, I believe that litigation to me is often a last resort. And I know Marissa is going to take me out and kill me on that one. But what I'd like to also do is partner with the taxing agencies, because here's a dirty little secret. Unpaid wages give rise to payroll taxes, which are trust fund taxes. Those are statutorily assessable against the officers and directors and chief financial folks and bookkeepers who don't pay the taxes on the unpaid wages. And one very effective way to handle this is to assess those taxes against the individuals involved.
Thank you. We'll go to Kevin next.
Thank you. The question about what we would do on this. There's another part of the equation besides the city attorney's office. That's the Bureau of Contract Administration in the Department of Public Works has an Office of Wage Standards and partners with the city attorney's office on bringing these cases. As a matter of fact, when we increased the minimum wage, the Bureau of Contract Administration, that was part of our department, was the partner with the business community in helping bring them along on minimum wage. Here's where I disagree with something said earlier. I don't believe that we have the proper resources to prioritize this. We can prioritize it from the city attorney's office side, but you've got to match it with the departmental side. I've done 7 budgets as president of Public Works. I have the relationships to have success with the city council and the mayor's budget team and the city administrative officer on the things that I would prioritize a city attorney like this, because that is critical. If you can't get the department side, you're not going to have success on the city attorney side. And those budgets are key. You can make a lot of promises about your priorities, but you got to have the resources.
Thank you. And we'll finish with Marina.
I am the daughter of undocumented immigrants from Mexico, from Michoacan and Jalisco. My mom worked at a chicken canning factory and my dad worked at an orange packing facility. Daily wage theft was a daily reality. It actually led me to be an AmeriCorps fellow right before law school. I spent a year working with migrant farm workers in the fields of Illinois, helping sue employers on behalf of migrant farm workers for exactly that, for wage theft. For me, this is obviously incredibly personal and very much an area where we need to fight. I would disagree a little bit with what's said before, and I think we need to litigate more. I think we need to go after these employers who are committing fraud and theft of the most vulnerable in our society, and we need to do it more. We need to go after them civilly, and we need to be going after them criminally, if that's even an option. I think that's something we need to pursue because right now it's not a priority, and it should be. And I think you get it there by electing a prosecutor to do a prosecutor's job.
Thank you. So before I ask our final prepared question, I will just say again, if anyone in the audience has any questions for the candidates, you've gotten to hear a little bit more about their positions. Now maybe you're feeling a little more comfortable. Raise your hand and an usher will come to you so that you can write your questions on index cards. So we'll have one more prepared question. I'll open it up to the audience for questions, but if not, we can keep asking some more prepared questions of the candidates. So for this next one, in my book, at least, a good attorney provides robust representation in court when their client has been sued, but perhaps a better attorney ensures that their client doesn't get involved with litigation in the first place. While the city attorney represents the city departments when they are being sued in court, there's an important compliance role for the city attorney to play in ensuring that city departments follow all applicable local, state, and federal laws, and particularly with regard to LAPD, that officers are respecting rather than abusing people's constitutional rights. How would you use the role of city attorney to support and implement policies that reduce officer misconduct and hold the department accountable to respect the people's rights? On this one, we're going to start with Teddy.
I think it starts with transparency and accountability. As the city attorney, we're the counsel to the LAPD. Last year, the governor signed a host of criminal reform measures. To me, one of the most important ones was Senate Bill number 2, which would hold officers accountable for their misconduct. And so I want to make sure we shine a light on this misconduct. Don't let and enforce the laws that we have, not let a police officer who commits an egregious violation move across our state or the nation to be a police officer somewhere else. But we have to, in doing so, make sure we have good communication with the police officers and with the police themselves to make sure that they're following these new rules that have been enacted last year.
Thank you. We'll go to Heidi next.
I'm so glad you mentioned compliance because I agree. One of the things I'd like to bring through to the city is the implementation of best practices in every aspect of the city's business. So for example, the city did not even have a portal by which to report sexual harassment or discrimination before the last couple of years in the wake of the Rick Jacobs scandal. If you take a look at the My Voice LA portal, it doesn't really work. It doesn't guarantee non-retaliation. It doesn't guarantee confidentiality, and it doesn't set up an independent ombuds. So one of the things I would do across the board, including for the LAPD, is rely on best practices. I do want to take 2 seconds to point out that the LAPD operated under a consent decree for more than 20 years, and that there are at least 6 or 7 different law enforcement agencies operating within city limits. I don't like tarring our LAPD necessarily with the misconduct of everybody in uniform across the country. And so we need to make sure that we are in compliance, and we need to deal with cases of excess force through disciplinary measures. But we also need to.
Thank you. We'll go to Marina next.
I think fundamentally we need to begin that conversation with the recognition of the past history that LAPD has with their communities of color. And I'm not talking about the last 5 years, I'm talking historically. We're still mending those relationships. We still have a lot of work to do. I've always believed that we need better quality policing, not less police. And so as city attorney, I would work with partnerships with community groups, partnerships with law enforcement officers to increase training, especially de-escalation training. We need more of it for our officers, especially the ones that are on the street all the time. It's good cops hate bad cops. And I think if there were more structures in place to ensure that there was better reporting, that there would be repercussions for those bad cops, we would have all of the good cops in our supporting this position. So we need, again, better quality policing.
Thank you. We'll turn to Faisal next.
I could talk about this forever. Look, it would be great to think that the police are just going to police themselves. And it would be great to have community partnerships and dialogues and all that sort of stuff. Unless you have a city attorney who will look LAPD in the eye and say, I will hold you accountable if you violate somebody's rights, the LAPD is not going to do a damn thing. Not a damn thing. I'm the only one here who actually defends people who have been wronged by the LAPD, who have been, whose rights have been violated, who have been beaten up by the LAPD, and who have been wrongfully arrested because they were black or brown. And nothing happens, folks. Nothing happens. What happens right now is if you file a claim with the city attorney's office, they will send you a letter within a month that says LAPD did nothing wrong, and then you will have to file a suit. You need a city attorney who will look at the LAPD and say, I will hold you accountable. I will make sure that you pay for what you have done. I am the only one on the stage who will even come close to saying that about LAPD.
Thank you. We'll go to Cherie next.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. I think one thing you and I have in common is that we both agree that a prosecutor should be independent and not take money from police law enforcement PACs, and I've agreed with that. I disagree with you as a former criminal defense attorney in my career. I've stood and held the line. I have told and made it clear that my job as the city attorney is to protect the people of Los Angeles, not just their pocketbooks from excessive verdicts, but the people. I'm the only Black person in this race. I'm the person that when I got pulled over 2 months ago was afraid that I was going to be taken out of my car by my hair. I have promised to prosecute cops and not defend them when they're sued. That's what we call accountability. I think I'm going pretty far.
Thank you, Cherie. And we're going to finish off with Kevin.
Thank you. Marissa, you asked about defending the city departments. You did put an emphasis on LAPD, but you just tell you there's a lot of
Compliance. I will say compliance. I asked about compliance.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's a risk management type issue. And as the former president of Public Works, the second largest department in the city, and just by the very nature of the work that we do, we end up sued a lot and in court because we're the city infrastructure department. So it's very important, and Marina referenced training. That's a very important element of compliance and risk management. So is data and equipment. And two of those go together with technology. So one of the things that I would do, and I heard best practices as well, the city attorney represents every department, including the Los Angeles Police Department. The best way to do that is through a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. And respect is key. It has to go both ways. But to have the best police force so the lawsuits are reduced, de-escalation training is key, equipment and data so you can hold everyone accountable.
Thank you. This has been the conclusion of our prepared questions. I would encourage people in the audience, we've done some great questions on index cards. Keep those questions coming and raise your hand if you have a question, and a volunteer will come over to you with an index card and a pencil or pen for you to write on. I'm gonna help provide a little bit of context for this first question. The city attorney's office is currently embroiled in a scandal because in the process of defending the Department of Water and Power in a lawsuit where individuals and consumers were alleging that they were misbilled and overbilled, the city attorney hired outside counsel that it was later revealed ended up working with plaintiff's counsel on a settlement that was very favorable for the city. Generally, counsel are not supposed to work together against their own client. I'm not saying generally, that is actually not allowed. Trying to be maybe a little too politically correct here.
It's a good place to start by not doing that.
You know, legal ethics 101, everybody. So that gives a little bit of context to this question. I would highly encourage everyone to read more about it. It's been highly reported in the LA Times. So this question is about that. In the DWP billing corruption scandal that the city attorney's office was raided in the FBI, would you have hired outside counsel in that case? And I'll add to this too, what will be your policy as city attorney for hiring outside counsel in the office's cases? Let's start with Cherie.
Great question. Again, this came from the consumer fraud and the 17-2, what we call 17-2 unit of my office. I know the individuals that were directly involved. In fact, I ended up leaving the city attorney's office after I wrote an email to Mike Fuhr and everyone between him and me saying, I think you are abusing your power. I think we're doing things incorrectly. In my 16 years of experience, sir, we need to do what we know to be right. We need to have the ethical walls up. That means the criminal and civil side of the office are not supposed to be working together at the same time. And I am a big proponent of, if you don't know how the office is organized, then you can't figure out what the problem is. Mr. Fuhr is a micromanager from personal experience, and I know that he knew every step of the way. We've got to have someone at the very top who's incorruptible, and that's who I am. I stood up and I lost my job.
Thank you, Cherie. We're going to go to Marina next.
So I'll start off by saying that my friends are on the other side. It was my office and my colleagues that were in charge of that raid. They have great stories, which I can't share any of right now. But my personal opinion is that corruption in that office is at the very top. There's a lot of wonderful, amazing city attorneys working there, almost 500 of them. But at the top, there is just such an entitlement. There is such a way of thinking that just harbors corruption and entitlement. The folks up at the top believe that they're above the law. I say this, and I'll say it as many times as I need to. I think the folks that are responsible for that corruption at the top all need to go to prison. I just think it sends such a bad signal to people in Los Angeles, because when public corruption gets at the very institutions of government, it means people don't have faith in their government, people stop voting, people stop wanting to be involved because they don't trust the government.
Thank you. We'll go to Teddy next.
You asked how we address and fix this type of corruption. I think first and foremost, when we have so many lawyers in the office, we should look to them first. We shouldn't have to go to external counsel. But in circumstances where we do, we have to have much better oversight. We have to make sure that we have controls in place. And those outside counsel, in this situation, Paul Paradis, who is the lawyer for the DWP, started another company that got a $30 million no-bid contract. We should not be able to allow counsel who we hire by the city to create a new company that provides other services without full disclosure, and that should not be permitted unless there's special circumstances.
Thank you. We'll go to Kevin next.
Without getting too much in the weeds on the type of case that was brought, this reverse auction class action settlement, that process of settling a case where you're basically picking both sides, that should be, while it's technically legal in the practice of law, in some areas it should not be legal when one of the parties is a public entity. So the city of Los Angeles, when I'm city attorney, would never, ever do that to begin with. So beyond just the issue of choosing the outside counsel, just the settlement process is a problem and should be illegal for a public agency. You mentioned that following it in the LA Times. A shout out to the Daily Journal. A year before the LA Times was on this case, the Daily Journal was really covering this in great detail, and I think helped I say prosecutors read newspapers, federal prosecutors read newspapers. I think that had something to do with why we ended up with the raid that we did. I would start an anti-corruption task force that includes partners from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State Attorney General's Office, the Comptroller's Office, the Ethics Commission, and the District Attorney's Office, because we need some independent oversight in what's happening in the building, and people need to know of someone to go to if they want to be a whistleblower.
Thank you. And for everyone, the Daily Journal is a kind of legal industry newspaper. So I think some of their articles are behind a firewall, but they did do some excellent reporting before the LA Times did some reporting that's now more publicly accessible.
They released a lot of that coverage beyond the firewall. at
Oh,
least
wonderful.
Fairly recently, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Well, then you can learn all about everything you wanted to know about legal ethics. We'll go to Faisal next.
So the number one thing that you need to do is oversight. That's how you prevent this problem, is you need to have adequate oversight. But I firmly believe, first and foremost, that city business should be done by city employees. Now, there will be some cases where might not have the expertise needed, so you'll need to find outside counsel, but it'll be very few. I plan to, first of all, have a committee that will select the outside counsel. So it will not just be me selecting outside counsel. So there is no impropriety, no appearance of impropriety, and we select the counsel that is best suited for the job. And then it's not just that. The problem that occurred here is, if you read the reports, Mr. Fuhrer's own chief deputy was involved and knew what was going on and now is facing legal issues. There shouldn't just be one person. There should be a committee that's basically watching what's going on. Just because you have outside counsel doesn't mean you lose your responsibility to see what is going on. And that's what needs to happen. You need to have oversight, and then you need to have transparency. Most of the work that can be released will be released, as my city attorney.
Thank you. And then we'll finish with Heidi.
I'll take it from the top. My office never would have been raided by the Department of Justice. The issue there was that the city attorney sat on a pile of documents, folded its arms, and said, these are all privileged. There's a way to deal with that. You create a privilege log, you go to court, and you ask for a protective order or a motion to quash. And once you are in court, the court gets to decide. Basically, tempting DOJ with nanner is not usually an effective approach to protecting documents. Secondly, at the core of this was a no-bid contract. I have been opposed to no-bid contracts for over a year. That is a problem in our city. We need to enforce the competitive bidding procedures of our city charter and shut down that avenue to corruption. Thirdly, there is a best practices called the 4 Eyes rule. The 4 Eyes rule is that you have at least 2 independent people approving every contract that the city enters into without a relationship with one another or supervisorial responsibility. If you implement the best practices in our procurement process, you will not have the issue of outside counsel. And finally, I do think that where you have a conflict of interest, you need to refer it out. And at the end of the day, if our city attorney's office is being investigated, someone else needs to do the investigation.
Thank you. Now, this question is also extremely timely. There was a feature today in the LA Times about hospice care fraud, which if any of you have been in the exceedingly tragic situation of having to make decisions about a loved one's final days in care, you know how much this pains families who are trusting the decision makers and are trusting the hospice care system. So how would your office work to protect seniors from hospice fraud? We'll start with Marina on this one.
You know, similar to my answer before, you know, when hospice fraud, you're preying on the people that are the most vulnerable. You're preying on the senior citizens that are in the hospice. You're preying on the families that, as Marissa mentioned, are facing some of the worst days in their lives, having to take care of individuals and their family that are just not able to take care of themselves. Here too, you know, the sole purpose, I think, of the city attorney's office, again, is to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. You need to have the tenacity and the courage to go after people, you know, and litigate and take them to court. It's all a question of where you have a limited amount of resources as a prosecutor, always. This is why in the federal government, we no longer prosecute marijuana cases, because you can decide where you're going to put those resources. And here, fraud against the most vulnerable individuals in our society should absolutely be a priority under the city attorney's office, and it would certainly be a priority under my administration.
Thank you. We'll go to Kevin next.
It's fraud on our most vulnerable, as Marina says, but also in one of their most vulnerable times in life. I have some experience from my earlier years, actually, working around the hospice issue. I moved to Los Angeles in the 80s as an openly gay man during the years of AIDS. Was the chairman of AIDS Project Los Angeles throughout the 90s. We had a lot of our clients and a lot of my friends that went through hospice care before we saw treatment in the mid-90s. So the potential for fraud is significant. In the city attorney's office, if you look at my website, it's kevinjamesforcityattorney.com. You'll see under ideas for city attorney, there are a number of new units. Those are entry points, if you will, for people who need assistance from the city attorney's office. There is, of course, one designed for our senior community to partner with the Department on Aging that we have in the city of Los Angeles. This is the kind of fraud that two levels. One, there may be a civil opportunity through 17200, of course, but there may be a criminal opportunity that may be beyond misdemeanor that might be something for the U.S. Attorney's Office or DA's office to handle that we could transfer over.
Thank you. We'll go to Heidi next.
You hit close to home for me. My father died in hospice care in March of 2020, and my mother was the subject of hospice fraud last fall when she moved in with me. So senior fraud and abuse is sort of front and center for me. What I find with the elderly is that you have to do outreach. There are so many of our older folks who have trouble keeping up with technology. Having a web page where people can go to or forming a bureau and a portal at the city isn't necessarily the help that people need. We have to make examples of people who say they're home health providers and then have a 90-year-old woman sign away all of her medical rights by signing a piece of paper to hospice care. We have to educate, do outreach, and prosecute the devil out of anybody who breaches that trust.
Thank you. We'll go to Cherie next.
In misdemeanor land, we call the charge elder abuse. There are provisions in the penal code that allow for elevated penalties for targeting the elderly. As part of my consumer fraud experience, I would add those enhancements to the charging complaint because the law recognizes that when you're older, when we all get older, or in my case, when I developed multiple sclerosis at 49, we become more vulnerable. And some people reach out and try to help, and some people take advantage of it. I prosecuted those cases because families were coming together and swallowing their pride to try to help mom, only to have Gil Cedillo's brother kidnap their mom and take her to the bank. I put him in jail. That's where he belonged.
Thank you. We'll go to Teddy next.
I think you can hear that protecting the most vulnerable should be a high priority for the office. I would ask the city attorney's office, I would lead an initiative that borrows as an example from what we've done to combat human trafficking. The city attorney's office partnered with community-based organizations and put up notices in many places where trafficking might occur, massage parlors, for instance. So you can call a hotline if you're a worker there and you might be a victim of trafficking. We should have similar notices all around elderly facilities or places where there might be someone taking advantage of another person in these vulnerable situations.
And we'll finish with Faisal.
Right. So this is where the affirmative litigation department is going to be very helpful. I would go after this hospice like a rabid wolverine to shut them down, to bankrupt them, basically, to make sure that they don't exist. Now, remember this case. This case is something that was at least what auditors are alleging, is that the California Department of Health knew about the hospice, knew what they were doing, and still gave them a license. Still gave them a license. That's what this case is about. Now, I would go after them, shut them down. You can prosecute them all you want. I would refer that to the DA's office or the U.S. Attorney's office. But as city attorney, my goal would be to make sure that no other office takes advantage of vulnerable seniors. And that's is her where hurt their pocket. Was running Medicare and Medi-Cal, yet if you go back, put them out of business, set an example for others not to do that.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that we have gotten so many wonderful questions. I am going to take the chance to ask two more. It does mean, I'm sorry, everybody, I'm going to close down your closing statement to 1 minute instead of 2, but I think you'll appreciate the opportunity to interact with these really wonderful have taken the time. So 2 more questions. So the first
such diverse candidates in this field that I'm proud to be up here with. It's a pivotal time for our city. I feel like I bring key experiences to meet the challenges of today. For over 20 years, I have volunteered my time and energy to helping people who have experienced homelessness. I think it's the #1 challenge in our city today. I've also worked in affordable housing. I will lead with compassion and urgency to make sure we declare a state of emergency on homelessness, streamline and cut red tape for housing approvals, and protect our renters and workers who are constantly losing their own homes. We can do a lot with the Affirmative Litigation Department. Wage theft is a key issue. I wrote an article with Senator Maria Elena Durazo about combating wage theft. It'll be a priority in our office, city attorney. Lastly, I'd finish by saying we have a strong grassroots support. We have received the most individual donations and the lowest average donation amount. I'm excited about our campaign, excited that you all came tonight. Hope I could earn your support.
Thank you for listening. I'm the only mother of small children, and that's one of the reasons I'm running. I have an autistic little boy, and I'm now working as a teacher in Day, and I'm studying the school to prison pipeline. There is so much we can do in this time. Not only do I bring my compassion and my personal life experience, I actually have experience within the office in areas that are very important. I have the hearts of my colleagues back at the office who want to get back to work and do justice. That's it. I'm a mother, I'm a fighter, and I'm a lover. I think I'm the person that needs to step up at this time and to help get Los Angeles back on track. Put me back to work. Put me back to work for Los Angeles.
There we go, sorry. I'm Heidi Feldstein Soto again. I want to make a few points. One is I'm a lifelong Democrat. I registered to vote as a Democrat in 1976 and have never been anything else. Two, I've never run for office before. I am 63 years old. I'm not coming to this job as a stepping stone in a political career or a landing place. I'm being pulled out of semi-retirement because I want to serve the people of the city. Three, this is not a DA role. I understand there's been a lot of conversation tonight about criminal law. The district attorney prosecutes felonies and related misdemeanors. That's what the district attorney does. The bulk of the role of the city attorney is outside the criminal justice system entirely. And we have abandoned that part of our city attorney's office for far too long. It's not a policy-making body, even if it exercises prosecutorial discretion. It's a body that has to respect the rule of law and issue legal opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. I moved to Los Angeles in 1988 to start my legal career, so I've been a lawyer in LA since then. And as Heidi just mentioned, and Marissa said earlier, 1/3 of the office is the criminal branch. That leaves 2/3 of the office is not on the civil branch. That's in the civil branch. This job, this office is the most important office on the ballot in 2022 when it comes to homelessness. Here's why. All these issues around who can sleep on the sidewalk, when they can sleep on the sidewalk, what they can have with them on the sidewalk, whether they can have with them on the sidewalk, all these issues are being decided in the courts. And the city attorney is the charter authorized liaison to the courts. That's where the critical issue around homelessness is going to have to be solved. I was able to work on amazing programs in the city. Everything from the raise of the minimum wage, the implementation of our targeted local hire program to help Angelinos most in need get a union card, and city employment. I've got the endorsement of lots of labor unions, and I hope I can earn your endorsement as well, since I have environmental organizations and business organizations too. Thank you.
Last. My name is Marina Torres, and as a federal prosecutor, I've shared with you, I've seen the worst of the worst that LA has had to offer. I've seen fraudsters, corrupt public officials, drug cartels. And in my position, I got to hold them accountable and I got to bring them to justice. I'm a longtime trial attorney who's not afraid of a tough fight. And that's what Los Angeles needs right now. LA is a city that my family came to this country for. It is a city that I came back from DC, the Obama White House for. And it's a city that I still continue to believe in. Because when I look at my city right now, I don't just see encampments. I don't just see businesses that aren't functioning. I don't just see people that are feeling unsafe. I see a lot of promise. I see a lot of people working together to try to bring our city back, to try to make our city better, who believe in the city's future. And I'll tell you what, running for office is hard, but sitting by, standing by, and watching your city being burned to the ground by corrupt and inept politicians is even harder. So I want to continue fighting for justice as your next city attorney.
Thank you all for your really thoughtful questions. I will say, I hope this has taught you a little bit more about the city attorney's office and its importance. Yes, 1/3 of the office is devoted to misdemeanor prosecution, but it's a very important third. It's a third that affects families, that can tear them apart or can make sure and protect someone from going to prison. So looking for city attorneys who value that care over punishment and incarceration is so crucial. Looking for city attorneys who are going to prioritize equity and justice. I hope you've heard today the diverse array of powers that the city attorney can engage in, from affirmative litigation to protect our rights, to policy advice that's really going to be relied on by city council and is going to define policy decisions, from compliance and making sure our city departments are following the law and respecting people's rights, to prosecuting misdemeanors or prioritizing diversion and restorative justice in a responsible and justice-centered way. Thank you again for all of your consideration to these issues. And again, you can visit the LA City Attorney Coalition's website for more information about the City Attorney's Office and our platform to center equity and justice in this office. And I'll let Kate close us out.
Yeah, first let's applause Marissa Roy. Thank you so much for asking the tough questions. And thank you to the candidates for the late night and sitting on the stage and taking the tough questions. Thank you. And all you beautiful, engaged voters for being here in person. Thank you. And as Marissa said, you can learn more about the candidates by visiting the LA City Attorney Coalition. That's www.lacityatttorneycoalition.org. Thank you to LA Community College and the League of Women Voters for partnering with everyone on this. And of course, be sure to vote. Election Day is June 7th, but you'll get your ballot sometime in May. Thank you.